My sister can't have kids and wants to name ours, but when we refused, she started spreading lies to the family. My older sister, 34F, was born without the reproductive organs required to have a biological child. Because of her condition, she also has some other health problems which disqualify her from adopting due to the uncertainty around her quality and length of life. She was aware for most of her life that she couldn't have biological children. That was discovered when she was still very young, but the rest came throughout her 20s. She had dreams of motherhood and had lists of baby names she wanted to use, but she will never be able to use them on children that are hers. What I, 28M, did not know at the time was she had saved her baby names and was hoping she would get to name or help name my future children. My wife, 27F, and I are expecting our first child. We haven't announced the sex, but my sister thinks we're having a girl and shared her girl names with us. We thanked her and said we, wife and I, would discuss what the name would be at some point. My sister looked upset by the response, and she then shared her boy names thinking she got it wrong. We gave her the same response. My mom suggested a couple of months ago that it would be generous and kind to let my sister have some input. I told her we felt it was better if we named our child ourselves. My wife and I did look at the list, just to see if we liked any of the names. We did not. Names on the lists included Elizabeth, Hannah, Rosemary, and Francesca for girls, and James, Edward, Patrick, and Michael for boys. Those just aren't to our preference. None of them were, and there were more names. My sister mentioned the names again recently, and she said we should pick Elizabeth for a girl and Michael for a boy. She said that's what she'd do if she were having the baby. I told her we hadn't made our mind up yet, but we're still in discussions about it. She offered to help, and I said no thanks. My wife and I want to figure it out between us. My sister said she wants to be a part of naming all our babies, that she would love to share all her endless thoughts on names that she'll never get to put into her own kid. I told her I understood she wanted that, but my wife and I as parents would name our child, and she does not get to be a part of that. I told her I understood that was hurtful to her, but she does not get a say. I also asked her to please stop bringing it up. My sister told me I could let her have at least a little say in this, and I said sorry, but no. She cried to Mom, who thinks we should be more sensitive, while my dad told my sister I wasn't wrong, and she needs to accept that she doesn't get to name our baby. My response has caused a divide among my parents and sister and me. It has been made clear my mom thinks I lack compassion, and my sister believes I'm hurtful to her. Ada, update. 1. All right, so a bit of time has passed since my original post, and things have only gotten weirder. After I told my sister and Mom that my wife and I would not be allowing my sister to name our baby, I thought that would be the end of it. I mean, I wasn't trying to hurt her, and I honestly didn't think it was such a big deal. At the time, I felt like I had explained myself well enough and was clear that my wife and I, as parents, had the final say on what we would name our child. But man, was I wrong. A few weeks after the conversation, my sister started acting really distant. She's usually someone who's pretty open and shares everything with me. We've always had a close sibling bond, or at least I thought we did. So, when she started dodging my calls and taking hours, sometimes days, to respond to texts, it felt off. I couldn't figure out if it was because of the baby name situation or if something else was going on in her life that she wasn't ready to talk about. But when she started avoiding me, it was obvious this whole thing had hit her harder than I realized. Then, my mom called me. Not unusual, we talk a lot, but this time the conversation felt heavier. After some back and forth about how things were going, she finally said, "Your sister is really struggling right now." I knew exactly where she was going with this. She said my sister was feeling shut out and rejected because I wasn't letting her be involved in naming our child. According to my mom, my sister's been crying about it and has told her multiple times that this whole situation is making her feel even more isolated from the idea of motherhood. Apparently, the fact that she can't have children is weighing on her more than ever now that I'm about to have one, And this is why the naming thing has become such a big deal for her. Mom asked if I could reconsider, or at least let my sister contribute in some small way. I explained to my mom, again, that I understood where my sister was coming from and that I sympathized with her. I get it. I really do. But at the same time, this is my child, and it's our decision. I told my mom that my wife and I had already gone through the names on my sister's list, and none of them were even close to what we wanted. Honestly, some of the names are just old-fashioned and not our style at all. I'm not naming my daughter Elizabeth or my son Michael just to make my sister feel better. Mom insisted that maybe it wasn't about picking one of the names on her list, but more about the gesture of letting her feel involved, even if it's symbolic. She just needs to feel like she's part of this, my mom said. She's never going to experience it for herself. At this point, I felt like I was being emotionally manipulated. I told my mom that my wife and I had already made up our minds. We're naming our child something we both like, and while we understand my sister's situation, this is not something we're going to compromise on. My mom was quiet for a moment and then said, "Well, you've made your bed, I guess." She didn't say it in a mean way, but it was clear she was disappointed in me. Then, things took another weird turn. About a week later, I got a text from my sister. It was long. Like, long. It started with her apologizing for how she's been acting lately, saying that she knows she's been distant and that it's been hard for her to deal with everything. She reiterated that she's happy for me and my wife and that she's excited to be an aunt, but then she went back to the name thing. She said that she felt like she was being robbed of the only chance she'd ever have to be part of something so special. She said, "You know I can't have kids, and you know this is something I've dreamed about my whole life. It's not just about naming a baby. It's about being part of something I'll never have for myself." The way she phrased it really hit me, but it didn't change my mind. I told her respectfully that I was sorry she felt that way, but we weren't going to let her name the baby. I reminded her that I'd already explained this to her, and that I needed her to understand that this was about my wife and me, and it wasn't something I could just let go of because of her feelings. I did tell her that I loved her, and that she would always be an important part of my child's life as their aunt. I hoped that would be enough. She didn't reply to that text for 2 days, and when she finally did, all she said was, "I get it." Since then, she's still been distant. She'll reply to texts here and there, but she's not as engaged as she used to be. We used to talk all the time about random things, but now, it feels like every conversation is forced or like she's just checking in because she feels like she has to. It's honestly pretty painful, but at the same time, I'm not sure what else I'm supposed to do here. I'm not going to let her guilt me into giving in on something that's such a personal and important decision for my wife and me. I do feel bad, though. I get that she's hurting, but at what point am I supposed to prioritize my sister's feelings over my own family? The tension has definitely made family gatherings awkward. We had a small get-together for my wife's birthday recently, and while my sister came, she barely spoke to me. She was polite enough to my wife, but the vibe was off. She left early, saying she had something else to do, which is unlike her because she's usually one of the last to leave when we hang out. My mom continues to gently push for reconciliation, telling me that maybe it would help if I gave my sister a small role in the baby's life, like maybe she could pick a middle name or help with something else baby-related. But again, that feels like caving to her pressure, and I don't want to set that precedent. My dad, on the other hand, has been quiet about the whole thing. I think he agrees with me but doesn't want to stir the pot any more than it already is. So, that's where we are. My sister is distant. My mom is disappointed, and I'm stuck in the middle, trying to balance my family's emotions while sticking to what my wife and I feel is right. I'm not sure how this will end, or if my sister will ever truly get over it. Right now, though, I'm just trying to focus on my wife and the soon-to-arrive baby, because at the end of the day, that's what matters most to me. Update 2. Alright, I wasn't expecting to post another update, but things have escalated in a way that I never saw coming. Buckle up, because it's been a wild few weeks since my last update, and honestly, I don't even know where to start. What I thought was just going to be a lingering tension has turned into a full-blown family drama, and it's stressing me out. So after the last update, my sister's behavior got even stranger. She wasn't just distant anymore. She was outright cold. She started skipping family events entirely. We had a little baby shower with close friends and family that my wife's side helped plan, and my sister didn't show up. She didn't even RSVP. This was weird because she's always been pretty involved in family stuff, and she was one of the first people excited when we announced the pregnancy. I thought maybe she was just giving me space since I had made it clear we weren't going to budge on the name, but when I asked her directly if everything was all right, she ghosted me. It wasn't until my mom called, again, that I found out what was really going on. Apparently, my sister has been venting to my mom non-stop, and things are way worse than I thought. According to my mom, my sister feels like I'm deliberately shutting her out, and that I'm being cruel by not letting her be a part of the naming process. But here's the kicker. My mom let slip that my sister has been doing something behind our backs. She's been telling people in the family that she was supposed to help name the baby, and that we promised her she could. She's painting this picture where she's the victim, and where my wife and I are going back on some agreement we never made. To make matters worse, she's gone as far as telling people the name she thinks we're choosing, which, by the way, is not even close to what we're considering, and saying that she had input in it. Apparently, she's been calling the baby Elizabeth to other family members and acting like she's already got this connection with the child because of that. It's bizarre. My wife and I were blindsided when my aunt called to congratulate us and said, "Elizabeth is such a classic name, it's lovely." We hadn't even announced our baby's name to anyone yet. When I confronted my sister about it, things exploded. I asked her point blank why she was telling people she was involved in the naming process and why she was making it sound like she had more of a role in this than she does. She got defensive immediately and said, "I didn't lie. I just told them what I thought the name was going to be. You've kept me in the dark this whole time. How was I supposed to know?" I reminded her that we made it clear from the beginning that we were naming the baby ourselves, and that while we appreciated her suggestions, we were never going to promise her any involvement. I told her she had no right to tell people the baby's name, especially since we hadn't even made a final decision. I was calm, but inside I was furious. This wasn't just about her feelings anymore. She was spreading false information and making it sound like we'd broken some kind of pact. She lost it. She started crying and shouting that I was taking away the only thing she could ever have, that I was being heartless, and that I was robbing her of the one thing that would make her feel connected to our baby. She kept saying, "You have no idea what it's like to never have this experience." I told her that I did sympathize with her, and that I could understand how hard it must be, but this wasn't the way to deal with it. I also told her flat out that spreading misinformation about our baby's name and making it seem like she had more of a say than she actually did was manipulative and wrong. She didn't want to hear any of it. She stormed out of the conversation, and I haven't heard from her directly since. My mom called me after that and, surprise, surprise, took my sister's side. She said I should have handled it more delicately and that my sister is just emotionally fragile because of her situation. She kept saying that I needed to understand where she's coming from and give her a little grace. I told my mom that while I understand my sister's pain, it doesn't give her the right to dictate how we handle our own child. My mom kept pushing, saying that it's a small gesture to let my sister feel included in some way, and that it wouldn't hurt to at least let her think she had a little input. I told her I wasn't going to compromise my and my wife's boundaries just to appease my sister's feelings. Then, out of nowhere, my mom dropped this bombshell. My sister has been talking to a lawyer about setting up a guardianship plan for our baby in case something happens to us. My jaw practically hit the floor. What? Why would my sister even be thinking about that, let alone talking to a lawyer? My mom said she wasn't sure how serious my sister was, but that she had mentioned it a few times in passing, saying that if she couldn't be a mother herself, she wanted to at least make sure she'd be a guardian if anything happened to my wife and me. I was speechless. This isn't just about the name anymore. It feels like my sister is trying to insert herself into my child's life in a way that's not healthy, and frankly, it's a little unsettling. I told my mom that if my sister even mentions anything like that to me or my wife, there's going to be a serious conversation. We've already made plans for guardianship in the unlikely event something happens to us, and newsflash, it's not my sister. I love her, but with her emotional instability right now, she's the last person I'd trust to raise my child if something ever happened to us. My wife, by the way, is livid. She's been pretty patient and understanding throughout all of this, but after hearing about the lawyer thing, she's done. She told me she doesn't want my sister involved in anything regarding the baby until she gets her act together, and honestly, I don't blame her. This whole situation is stressing both of us out, and we should be focused on the baby's arrival, not on managing my sister's emotions. So yeah, here we are. My sister is off the rails, my mom is enabling her, and my wife and I are trying to figure out how to navigate this mess while keeping our boundaries intact. I don't know if things will ever go back to normal between us, but at this point, I'm more concerned about protecting my family and making sure my sister understands that she doesn't get to play these games with our child's life. Update 3. All right, this is going to be my last update on this situation because honestly, it's reached a point where I just need to step away from the drama for the sake of my own sanity. A lot has happened since my last post, and it feels like we're now dealing with the aftermath of all the tension. I'm not going to lie, things have gotten even more complicated, and I'm still kind of processing everything. Here we go. After the whole lawyer situation came up, I decided to have one last serious conversation with my sister to set some boundaries. I didn't want to drag this out any longer, and I certainly didn't want to escalate things any further by ignoring the elephant in the room. So I invited her to meet up at a neutral spot, just the two of us, so we could talk things out face to face without anyone else getting involved. I figured, if we're going to fix this, it's going to be between me and her. When we met, things started off tense. She seemed guarded, and I was already on edge because I knew what I needed to say wasn't going to be easy. I opened by telling her that I loved her, and that she's always been an important part of my life, but we needed to address the way things have been going lately. I reminded her that my wife and I had made it clear from the beginning that we were handling the baby's name ourselves, and while I understand her pain about not being able to have children, that doesn't mean she gets to make decisions for our baby. I told her flat out that the whole lawyer thing crossed a serious line. That's not something you joke about or bring up lightly, and the fact that she was even thinking about trying to insert herself into a guardianship situation without our consent was deeply troubling. She didn't take that well. She started crying again, which at this point has become a pretty common reaction whenever we talk about this. She told me she felt like I was shutting her out of the most important thing in my life, and that this was making her feel more alone than ever. She said that while she understands I'm upset, she didn't mean to make things worse by talking to a lawyer. It was just something she'd thought about, because she wanted to make sure she had a role in my child's life, if anything ever happened to us. I told her I understood where she was coming from, but that's not how this works. My wife and I are the parents, and we're the ones who decide who's involved in our child's life, in what capacity. I explained to her that right now, she's making everything about herself, and it's not fair. I told her that while I empathize with her struggles and her grief over not being able to have children, that doesn't mean we have to compromise our boundaries to make her feel better. My child is not a way for her to fulfill the dreams she couldn't have herself. That might sound harsh, but I needed her to hear it. At this point, she got really quiet, and for a moment, I thought maybe we were finally getting somewhere. But then she hit me with something I absolutely wasn't expecting. She said, "You're right. I can't have kids, and it kills me every day. But what hurts more is that I'm losing you too. She started explaining that for her, it's not just about the baby name. It's about feeling like she's being replaced in my life now that I'm starting my own family. She said she's terrified that once I have my own child, I won't need her anymore, that I'll drift away from her the same way she feels she's been drifting away from the idea of motherhood. I wasn't prepared for that. I didn't realize that her fear of being left out was so much deeper than just the baby name thing. It made me realize that maybe I hadn't been as sensitive to her situation as I thought I had. That doesn't change the fact that her behavior has been over the line, but it helped me see that this whole thing wasn't just about wanting to name the baby. It was about her feeling like she's being pushed out of my life. I told her that I understood now why she felt the way she did, but I reassured her that becoming a dad doesn't mean I'm going to forget about her, or that she won't be a part of my life anymore. I reminded her that I want her to be an amazing aunt to my child, but she has to respect the boundaries my wife and I have set. I told her that if she keeps pushing like this, she's going to end up damaging our relationship more than anything else, and that's the last thing I want. After a long silence, she finally nodded and said, "I don't want to lose you either." That was probably the closest we've come to a real breakthrough. She apologized for the way she's been acting and admitted that she hadn't realized how much she was letting her own grief cloud her judgment. She said she would stop pushing the name issue and that she'd back off on trying to control things that weren't her place to control. It felt like, for the first time in a long time, we were on the same page. I wish I could say that everything was instantly better after that conversation, but it wasn't. Things are still a bit awkward, but at least now there's a sense of understanding between us. My sister has kept her word. She hasn't brought up the baby name or tried to insert herself into any decisions since that talk. She's been more responsive to texts and calls, and while she's still a bit distant, I can tell she's trying to rebuild our relationship without overstepping this time. As for my mom, she's still a bit of a wild card in all of this. She hasn't pushed the issue again, but I can tell she still feels like I'm being too hard on my sister. She's made a few comments here and there about family sticking together, but I've learned to let it slide. I'm done arguing about it. My dad, on the other hand, has been a rock through this whole thing. He called me after my conversation with my sister to say that he's proud of me for sticking to my guns while still trying to make peace. He told me that becoming a parent means making hard choices, and sometimes that includes protecting your own family's boundaries, even if it causes friction with others. That really helped me feel validated in all of this. Now, my wife and I are focused on the final preparations before the baby arrives. The drama has definitely died down, and we're both relieved to finally have some peace. My sister has made it clear she wants to be involved in the baby's life as an aunt, and as long as she keeps respecting our boundaries, I think we can work towards healing the relationship. I'm not going to lie, this whole thing has been exhausting. It's been a lot of emotional labor trying to navigate the fine line between supporting my sister and standing up for my wife and me. But I feel like we're finally at a place where we can move forward. My wife and I are ready to welcome our baby into a family that, while imperfect, is trying to come back together in a healthier way. I'm hoping the birth of our child will be a fresh start for all of us. Thanks to everyone who has followed this roller coaster. It's been a wild ride, but I think we're finally coming out on the other side. I just hope my sister keeps her word and that we can focus on what really matters now, our growing family.